Well, it's night 4 with no electricity, and I keep trying to come up with ways to amuse myself here in the dark. And so tonight I thought I would do some ghost stories from Understanding is the New Healing. This one is called Ghost in the Machine. Hardwood floors, plank ceilings, thick cottage walls, an open stone fireplace. Sounds like the inner sanctum of my local pub. But no, this was our new home. Situated only a few miles outside of Athlone in the picturesque village of Brideswell, my girls and I had relocated to the solitude of the Irish countryside, complete with a garden adorned by apple trees, the obligatory stone walls, and rolling green fields. I guess I'd become quite fond of the sheep, as they were now my neighbors, along with the cows, horses, and occasional donkey. Built in 1912, the house had belonged to Mr. George Burke, and as far as we were concerned, it still did. Renovated and restored to its former glory, our new neighbors, Dermot, Anne-Marie, and their son Shane, had worked tirelessly to recapture what every antiquated, whitewashed farmhouse could hope to be: authentically Irish. I mourned not only the loss of my relationship with the girl's father, but also the loss of the palatial family home that we had designed and built a few years earlier. I now looked around and embraced the idea of home is where the heart is. I was flying solo now. Not only was I an American living out her childhood fantasies of rainbows and fairy forts, I was living in a quaint Irish cottage that came with a little something extra: Mr. Burke. When my kitchen lights began to flicker on the evening of August 7th, 2007, I figured Mr. Burke, our resident spirit and the previous owner of our new home, was just saying hello, or that I needed to change the light bulb. From the first day we had shifted our belongings into the Irish cottage in the country, we had been greeted by the smell of turf fires when no fire was lit, moving furniture when no one was moving it, and footsteps up and down the hallway on any given night. Music would often play quietly out of nowhere, and on numerous occasions my two little girls would see Mr. B standing at the foot of their bed. They saw him, could describe him down to his last whisker, and they simply adored him. After their father had left the country, Mr. Burke had become the new man in our lives, body or not, and quite frankly, this was my dream relationship, a male presence with no commitment required. The girls would run through the back door every time we arrived home, shouting, "Hi, Mr. Burke, we're home." I know, some future therapist is going to put their kids through college on that one. On this particular night, however, Mr. Burke wasn't up to his usual antics. We had a new visitor. Not long in the door, from a weekend away in the wild west of Ireland, my friend Tanya and her daughter Casey were staying the night before, heading back to County Longford the following morning. The girls were all in bed, giggling, having an absolute ball. They were enjoying that lovely time in childhood when the grown-ups are none the wiser, that torches are on under the blankets and sweets are stashed in the pillowcases. The girls felt safe and assured by our voices in the kitchen, chatting over a cup of tea. However, what they were actually hearing was no ordinary chat. The kitchen table was covered with colorfully wrapped presents that had arrived in a package from the girl's dad. He'd been gone from Ireland for well over a year. His job as a marine engineer took him to all sorts of interesting ports of call. Tanya remarked that the gifts reminded her that it was, in fact, her dad's birthday. Tanya's father, Sean, had been killed in a car accident in November of 1999. She still grieved the loss. After all these years, I still can't believe he's gone. The light began to flicker as we stared at each other with that, "Did you see that? Look." Not only did we see the light, but we also saw two other lights. Tanya had two mobile phones, one for personal use and one for business. One sat on the kitchen counter and the other between us on the table. Both phones lit up simultaneously. They were flashing on and off, yet not ringing. And then we heard it, a mechanical voice coming through one of the phones. "I am here." "Sweet Mother of Divine! Mary Helen, did you hear that?" "I am here. Proud of you." Now, I don't get spooked too easily. Are you kidding? With the life I've led, I was totally freaking out. I'd heard of the electronic voice phenomenon on those zany ghost hunting shows. Sounds picked up with high-powered microphones as some wide-eyed celebrity host whispered closely into the camera to the at-home audience as if they were right there in the dank, dark cellar of some ancient English castle. I'd heard of it, but I'd never actually heard it. With every hair standing on end, we grabbed a crystal pendulum and quickly asked to be shown the direction for yes, then no. With a voice trembling with excitement laced with a little dash of terror, Tanya asked, "Sean, is that you?" The pendulum began to wildly swing in the direction of yes. Light still flickering, my eyes welled up as I watched and listened to Tanya's daddy communicate with his little girl. This was a huge moment for me. On so many occasions, I have delivered messages from the other side to people who sit in shock, awe, and sometimes horror as friends and relatives make their presence known. At first, it's a leap of faith, until inevitably the Spirit uses some obscure piece of information that I couldn't possibly know to let their loved ones know, hey, it really is me. To watch someone else hear it and to see it for themselves was a pivotal point in my experience as one who converses with those in spirit. Believe it or not, having this gift can be a little lonely at times. To observe the story as opposed to being the one telling it was a rare treat for me. In some way, it validated my own struggles with the ability to hear spirits over the years. As cool as this may sound, there are equally as many people who think there's something else afoot. A little cray-cray, delusional, playing with the dark side. Luckily, I'm not really bothered by other people's opinions. However, a little piece of me was totally relieved when the soul chose to share his voice outside of my head. A decade following his death, Tanya was gifted with the chance to spend one last birthday with her daddy. Really, there are no words to describe her elation that night. Less than a month later, I was going through some photos on my laptop of a trip I'd taken in June to Martinsville, Virginia, my hometown in the USA. I'd been delighted to hear that my parents' next-door neighbors, the McLeans, were at long last planning a trip to Ireland. Charlotte and Alan had seen as much of me in their house as my parents had in my own home when I was a child. They had one son, Brother James, my dad called him. I was his babysitter, and I loved him as if he was my own little brother. Charlotte had been my piano teacher from the day I'd been tall enough to reach the keys. It was no easy task, because even as a child, I would rather socialize and hated to practice. I was a true source of frustration. Charlotte would get me to stand across the room, facing the wall, while she would play random notes on the piano. She quickly had discovered that I had perfect pitch, the ability to pick out any note on the keyboard and identify it only by hearing the tone. What a waste, I'm sure she thought, but to this day I can assure her that the talent didn't go unused. Listening to the delicate harmonics of the human energy field is a far cry from learning to play the classics. Nonetheless, her years of hardship with her most challenging pupil certainly paid off. I'm able to hear minor discrepancies in a person's electromagnetic frequency that helps me to pinpoint physical and energetic dysfunction within the system. Roll over, Beethoven. During most of my trips home, our schedules never seemed to match up for anything other than an all-too-brief catch-up. This time, Charlotte and I both found a day that we were free and decided to spend an afternoon in the town's Museum of Natural History. A great feather in the cap of the former furniture capital of America, Martinsville was home to the research facility for archaeological finds from around the great state of Virginia, including several large dinosaur bone exhibits. A display of the history of the American Indians native to the region were currently the main attraction. As an ambassador for the community, Charlotte was so proud to show off the museum's latest edition. I took several photographs, including a lovely one of my dear neighbor in front of a magnificent reproduction of a Native American wigwam. Back in Ireland, I'd pulled up the photos on the laptop that I had taken in June and was showing them to my girls. I had just gotten to the picture of Charlotte posed in front of the wigwam when I went to click on the next picture. It wouldn't budge. I wasn't prepared for what came next. Don't be afraid. His time is here. Don't be afraid. His time is here. The mechanical voice spoke rapidly, saying the same words over and over. The computer is talking, Mommy, 3-year-old Jada squealed excitedly. Why won't the picture of Mrs. What's her name again? Mrs. McLean, Gemma. That's Mrs. McLean, I murmured to my puzzled 5-year-old with a sense of foreboding. The robotic words kept repeating. I ran upstairs 2 at a time to grab my digital recorder, praying that the voice wouldn't stop before I made it back down. The girls were screaming as they had now deciphered what it was saying. Whose time is here, Mommy? Who is it telling us not to be afraid of? It was Sunday evening, September 2nd, 2007. I looked at the clock and subtracted 5 hours, wondering if Mom and Dad might be home from church yet. I had now recorded the voice, and it continued to repeat its automated warning as I placed the call. "Hello?" Mom answered, chipper as always. "Hey, Mom, it's me. Quick, have a listen to this." I held the phone up to the computer and let her listen to the eerie phrase at least 10 times over. "My heavens, what in the world is that?" "Mom, you're not going to believe this, but the computer has frozen on a picture I took of Mrs. McLean this summer, and a weird mechanical voice is now talking through the speakers." "Did you record that voice on the computer?" Bless her heart, Mom had only just begun to experience the phenomenon of email and had absolutely no idea how a computer worked. I can't say I was too far ahead of her, but this I did know. This was a still photograph, not a video, and the motorized voice was reminiscent of the one I had heard only weeks before when Tanya's deceased father had spoken through her mobile phone speaker. Something inconceivable was taking place. "I can make out afraid, but I can't hear the rest very clearly," she said, still baffled. "Mom, it's saying, 'Don't be afraid. His time is here.'" Oh my, his time? Do you think it's talking about Alan? I sure hope not. They're supposed to be coming over in a few weeks. Oh my gosh, what should we do? The concern was growing in her voice. "There's not a lot we can do, Mom. It's certainly not the kind of thing you can call up and casually drop on somebody." No, it certainly isn't. By the time we had finished the conversation, the voice had finally stopped. "Well, girls, we need to say a special prayer for the McLeans tonight. Things might be changing for them soon." I snuggled up with the girls, trying my best to explain the inexplicable. "Is Mr. McLean gonna die, Mommy?" Jada asked in a sad little voice. "That's in the hands of the Creator, honey. And remember, we are the creators of our soul's plans here on earth. All of us are born, and all of us will return back to spirit. Some of us just go a little sooner than others. You both need to understand that part of being who we are sometimes means seeing things or hearing things before they happen. Some of these things can be wonderful, while others can make us feel very, very sad, especially when the news is about someone we know and love. I want you to know it's never something you need to be afraid of. We've been given a very special gift. Your great-grandfather had it, Grandma has it, I have it, and you both have it. Sometimes for you and me, knowing when people are going to leave this world is just part of the gift." "Well, they can keep it," Gemma cried. "I don't want to know unless it's nice. What if some voice tells me you're going to die? Or Jada?" She buried her little face in my chest and sobbed. I empathized with her concern. I had known the circumstances surrounding my own death and the deaths of my parents since I was younger than her. Sleep did not come easily for any of us that night. The following day, I arrived into work and played the eerie proclamation I had recorded for my office manager. Well seasoned after years of dealing with my weirdness, as she called it, she listened intently. I asked her to tell me what she thought it was saying. "Don't be afraid. The time or his time is here." She listened on with a slight look of horror. Our friend Mick was visiting the office for a cup of tea and a chat. A former guard, Irish police officer, turned private detective, Mick also listened to the recording with his well-trained ear. "No, that's saying don't be afraid. His time is here. I'm certain of it." Mick folded his arms and crossed his legs, confident with what he had just heard. On Thursday morning, September 6th, our dear friend and neighbor, Mr. Alan McLean, passed away. Mom hardly knew what to say when she rang. She really didn't have to say anything. Always positive in her outlook, she expressed how grateful she was that he had died at home. Can you imagine how horrible it would have been if they'd been crossing the Atlantic or already in Ireland? That would have been so much more difficult for Charlotte and James to deal with. When giving my condolences, I told Charlotte that I had loved Alan dearly and was blessed with wonderful memories of this truly great individual. I recounted his sense of humor, the amazing parties they threw during my childhood that centered on his extensive and incredibly sentimental electric train set. I especially remembered that he always had time for me. That's what meant the most. I've said numerous times in the past, just because you know doesn't make you immune. Death no longer has the same sting after having my own temporary demise, but my heart still hurts every single time I lose a character from the story of my own life. This passing was particularly tough, as I now had to break the news to my little girls. They hadn't known him well, but had seen him every time they had visited their grandparents in America. They were none too happy about the fact that they knew it was coming. They both cried that it just wasn't fair. I knew exactly how they felt.